Goes with hopefully this one has a home run. It's a good deal.
Right. Right. Too much money. Oh, there's the minute.
I timed it, there's no way you did the speed limit.
What's that?
I timed you, there's no way you did the speed limit.
There is no way. Oh, hi there, Cat. No, you can stay. It's all right.
Okay, great. There's not. Oh, yeah. Jim, what was you? Did you give up?
Who's name? I think I saw it. It's name, Jill. Nice one. That was a gift.
So are we ready to open the meeting?
All right, being late.
You're fine, you're fine. We're just getting.
I was matching up socks for kids. If I didn't mind getting away from that. I don't know how much we spent on socks since we adopted them. Where do the other ones go?
I don't know, but I say the same thing to my.
That'd be like me, you just buy one. I usually do, and then it doesn't matter. Yeah, they're all gray, it don't matter. No, but if you come out a short one, you're, what's your day? Sock puppet? Oh.
So are we ready? Okay, I'm gonna open the Wolcott Select Board meeting of January 27, 2025. This is a special meeting tonight. We're just here to do a run through the wastewater ordinance. It's just a draft for select board comments and concerns, and we're also going to go through the draft of the Vermont Wastewater Sewer Commissioners. We have a special guest with us tonight, Julie Beth Hines from Birchline Consulting. Planning,
something like that, basket weaving.
Julia Beth has been working with us as a consultant to help us put these ordinances together, and she is going to lead the meeting.
I think we're gonna walk through this together. That's ready.
And we also have Tori and Seth from the Planning Commission here with us, so we'll also be very instrumental in pulling this together.
All right. Richard, you need a copy, or anyone want a printed copy?
Yes, please.
All right, is that? I scribbled on one, let's see, that one.
Thank you.
That one, we've got seven copies. I can find somebody who I have, if that's how you want me to make it out? You know what, was probably not a bad idea. That would be, thank you. I don't have to have a printed one.
So you want both the draft, the
I
bylaw?
think it's probably good, yeah, probably a good idea. And then somebody, if you want to like. Okay. So. One of the things, when we finally get to the point where it looks like there's going to be a wastewater system, what communities that set up a new wastewater system where you haven't had one have to figure out really is three things. First, you have to figure out who's going to be the decision-making body going forward and make the decisions on things like collecting money, how much you're charging each year, what to do with, paying the bills for the engineering inspections or maintenance and repairs. How you're going to allocate, how you're going to let people sign up to connect, all the administration, all the things that basically a board of utility commissioners does in places like Morrisville that have a water and sewer system, public system. I've been through, this is not my first rodeo at this. I have went through it as director of the Matterhorn Planning District back in the 90s with Waitsfield and Warren. And then again in Waitsfield when we did some small community wastewater systems. I work with a lot of small communities figuring out how we're going to manage new collective infrastructure. And the first thing that has to be figured out is who gets to make those decisions? And you got some options, but the job is pretty basic. It's pretty well defined in statute. So we need to look at that. And that's the bylaws document. That's the document that says, Alan, when you get a chance to look, how do we want to organize ourselves? So that's piece number one. Piece number two in the ordinance is where it starts to get thick. And that's who has to connect to the system and under what circumstances. Which properties, based on their septic system, age, and function and capacity, which people, if any, within that service area are going to be allowed to keep their septic and not pay and not be connected. That's always a difficult decision, especially in a small community. So that's piece number two that's governed by ordinance. Piece number three is the even more fun part of how do we allocate the annual cost of this system among property owners who are connected. How do we balance it out between residential customers, town, and non-residential customers? And that also relates to if there's extra permitted capacity in this system, and you're going to have some, how does the town allocate that? How much do you charge people who want to, after the system is built, buy additional capacity in that system? So those are the three big issues that are in this 35-page ordinance document. So usually what works fairly well here, and our friends on Zoom, Michelle has stepped out, so if you want to comment or ask a question, unmute yourself and yell until Michelle comes back. So starting on the front page of the ordinance, Michael, did you make copies?
Yeah, but
She's coming. Any wastewater ordinance in Vermont has to have certain chunks and certain provisions, and these are set. The statutory ordinance, the statutory reference is Title 24, which is all the municipal government law, mostly Chapter 59, but also chunks of 95, 97, 101, which is basically delegated authority to the town to manage public infrastructure, water and sewer. So what a local ordinance does is basically state that you, as the select board with authority to vote this ordinance in, are giving either yourselves or a board of wastewater or sewer commissioners authority to manage the system. No, I'm thank you. Okay. And that is the guts of Article 1, general provisions. So that takes us through about page 10. Also some marvelous abbreviations. I'll be a quiz on those tomorrow morning. You don't get 100%, let's take your money away, right, Lynette? You see that she's awake. Okay.
I'm like,
Okay. Article 2 is use of the wastewater system, section 6, and this will be on page 11. I'm just going to walk through the table of contents so we know what the pieces, parts are. Section 6 basically says that once the town has this public infrastructure, the town has authority over it and people cannot just randomly connect to it or abuse it. It's in the same way you can't randomly make a curb cut connection to a town road. So section 7 is where we get into establishing some kind of board of sewer commissioners. Again, it can either be the select board taking on that function, or you appoint a group of people. That's your decision. Establish a service area, that area within which wastewater service is available. And then sections really 3 through 6 and a little bit of 7 are all about who is allowed to keep a septic system and under what circumstances within that sewer service area. So we will talk about that because that's some important policy choices. Just finishing out section 7, number 7 and 8 are how do you connect to the system lawfully? And then how much capacity must, for example, a new cafe purchase? We're basically deferring to the state's rules. Okay. So that's section 7. That's where this choice comes of who has to connect, who is required to connect. Section 8 is all kinds of basics of the technical standards for connecting. It's things like you cannot connect a janky old rusty pipe from your building to our wastewater system. It must be a proper building sewer connection. Plumbing code applying. This is all the how. If you get an engineer or a licensed plumber connecting someone to the system, these are all the standards they must follow to ensure that you've got proper connections. Alan was chatting about plastic pipe and water systems. We don't want poor quality connections. That's all governed under section 8. Article 3 on capacity in the system. This always feels when we do this like so many words and so much stuff, but it's all about how you decide who gets to make use of the treatment capacity in this system. Including, does the town want to actively set aside some of that capacity for town use in the future or as sort of a strategic reserve? And we can talk more about it. But there are also some important elements of not letting a property owner, say, tie up or reserve capacity without then going on to either pay you for that or use it. Because you don't want people tying up capacity, but then not paying for the cost of keeping that system functional while they figure out what they're going to do. So this all happens in section 9 and 10. 11 is pro forma legal stuff about subdivisions. And then we get to Article 4, which is how much do people pay? And that really all the action happens in section 12. 13 and 14. 13 refers to the authority under statute to establish a limited dedicated fund for capital improvements. And 14 is, all about making sure people are paying. Article 5, which is 15, 16, 17, 18, and then most of Article 6, which is administrative and what happens if somebody does something dumb. Those are mostly really straightforward pro forma regulations, tracking with the authority under statute to make sure that nobody discharges the wrong stuff into the system and causes it damage. And if you get somebody doing dumb things, what are your rights as the owners of that system to go in, enter, maintain, abate, and recover costs? So last but not least, very much like we have for other things in the town, from cat licenses to building permits, you're going to have a schedule of fees, application fees, connection fees, etc. That's set by your board, and they get to that. And that, friends, is the anatomy of a wastewater ordinance. Thoughts? Questions, Barbara, remarks? Just want to make sure we get a sense of what the pieces, parts are as we start this majestic journey. An important sort of background note on this. There was a town in Chittenden County that starts with a W that spent a lot of federal money working through a wastewater project, including development of an ordinance, including a very detailed legal review of that ordinance. This is directly descended from that ordinance with significant changes around who has to connect and the fee structure. But the rest of this has been reviewed by Stitzel, Page, and Fletcher for consistency with applicable Vermont statute. That doesn't mean we don't need to get a legal review on behalf of the town of Wolcott. It's been pretty challenging to get legal services in a timely way. Hopefully we can close that loop. This has been vetted very carefully by municipal attorneys as you see it here. And it's certainly not just stuff that's been made up. Okay, so I want to start with governance. Who is the board, or? Okay. So if we go to the general provisions are, this is starting on page 5 of the draft. This is all very basic stuff. Section 4, starting on page 6, is definitions. Gotta have those. And one that I want to call your attention to, because this is important, is on page 7. And that is the definition of what constitutes a failed system, failed on-site septic system. This is a definition that was developed with my dear colleague, Dr. Mark Gross from the University of Arkansas, who's an eminent dude in this field. And this is, I think, an effective description of what you don't want to have happening. And this becomes important to you because if somebody has a failed system that cannot be abated properly, or they won't, the sewer commissioners or select board would have the authority to connect that house or business to the wastewater system and charge that back as a lien on their property. So this is the description of what do we mean by it has failed and it's a hazardous condition that has to be abated.
And do these agree with the Vermont wastewater rules?
Yes. I mean, unless Lynette or Ashwak, you want to.
I just attended the new sewer workshops that the state would put on, and I just wanted to make sure that these read the same way.
I mean, these are, well, we don't have a statutory definition of failed system, which is a little bit of an issue.
No, but they do have a wastewater rule book that
Right.
has a failed system definition.
These are descriptions of the situations that would constitute failure in Vermont. Failure is not an option. Discharge of improperly treated sewage, surface, or groundwater for sure. Malfunctioning that results in wastewater backs up backups into or not flowing out of an occupied structure.
So the difference with the Vermont statute or the Vermont rules rather is that there is a time frame. If it does it seasonally, they're failed, but if it does it once, they're not.
If you want to make a change, this is where we would do it.
I would just want this to read exactly as the state has, it, in my opinion.
Okay,
If that's how the state is gonna have it defined, I think that we should agree with that. Again, I'm 1/5 of an opinion here, so.
Hi. Hello. I just wanted to say if you want like a definition exactly like the wastewater rules we have, a precise definition of a failed system. I think you may refer directly to that definition, or you can take the different elements of what is meant by the failed system.
Like I said, I just want to make sure that we agree.
So you're telling me that the state allows a one-time, if it doesn't work once seasonally?
Seasonal failures constitutes failed system. A backup due to a plug D-box or an unpumped tank or something like that does not constitute a failed system. And I just don't see that laid out as separate here.
The state's guidance on failed septic system is defined as a system that allows wastewater to be exposed to the open air, to pool on the surface of the ground, discharges directly to surface water, or to back up into a building. I think this is very consistent. Now, you can certainly add some sort of time to that. Okay, so it says, you're right. A system shall not be a failed system if effects can be and are remedied solely by minor repairs, have lasted only a brief period of time, cause of failure has been determined to be an unusual and non-recurring event, and system has recovered from a state of failure. Systems that have recurring, continuing, or seasonal failures shall be considered to be failed. So
I guess the question that I have is, could we reference the wastewater rules?
we can. My view with the wastewater rules is that well, it also would add, it results in a potable water supply being affirmatively determined to be a failed supply, and that information's been posted on the agency's website. But if you want to, we could simply paste in the state definition. I'm going to put it in this draft.
If you were to paste in the state definition, I think that we would also need to paste in what minor repairs are constituted in the eyes of the state.
Well, it says, actually, in the text, it says minor repairs including the repair of a broken pipe leading from building or structure in the septic tank, replacement of cracked or broken septic tank, or replacement of a broken pump or associated valves, switches, or controls. Brief period of time also is not defined. That's a judgment call. The cause of failure has been determined to be unusual or non-recurring event, and the system's recovered. I mean, I think you can, a reasonable person can figure that out. So, I don't love the construction of little I. That's why I put my version in here, but I think we're on the same page. We want it to be same as the state. Got it. And that's why I brought it up. Okay. The rest of this is all very basic and all exactly what is in effect in most other communities in Vermont that have an approved wastewater system and ordinance. Sludge, stormwater, reserve capacity, etc. Built system is definitely a key definition in the definition section. Abbreviations, will be a quiz. Okay. So page 11, article 2, this is unlawful acts, compliance with regulations required. And I do want to point out that in adopting a wastewater ordinance, this is section 6, number 3 at the bottom of page 11. Private wastewater systems compliance with applicable regulations required. And it basically says within the town of Wolcott, you are saying, as the state has already said, that septic systems need to be maintained in a proper manner. All right. Sections, yes.
One quick question
Yep.
there. Compliance in the state currently has section 1-303 clean slate exemptions for pre-2000 systems that haven't yet been deemed as failed. Just reading through this, are these intended to allow those non-permitted yet still state compliant systems to exist outside of the
Yes,
floodplain?
absolutely. It says that tight capacity locations should comply with mandates of the state of Vermont, including those, but not limited to those regarding wastewater treatment and disposal by on-site systems. So providing you are state compliant, you're good.
Which is inclusive of clean slate exemptions.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, and then we get to what about the ones within the service area? So this is section 7. And this is where all the fun starts with who has to connect. So your committee and your professional engineering team have had a lot of discussions about this. Balancing out, individual determination and the need to have a functioning wastewater system. So, section 7, number 1, board established. That last sentence says the select board in its capacity as the body which shall organize and appoint the board of wastewater commissioners is obligated to comply with the conditions of those permits. Either the select board acts as the board of sewer commissioners or you will appoint a group of humans to do that. The bylaws that we've drafted up envision a 5-member board with, I believe, Linda, 2 select board members, so that board can meet without having to be a warned select board meeting. So a couple select board members on it. Alternatively, you could decide that the select board should be the board of sewer commissioners, and then during your meetings, you're just going to read it. Somebody's going to make a motion to convene as the board of sewer commissioners for purposes of X, Y, Z. Either is fine. It's entirely up to you what works best for the town. But we would make that statement here. So then we get to 7.2.
Here now to make these decisions.
You certainly don't have to do it tonight, but it's a decision to think through at some point. I think while you've got your technical team, probably the other 2 issues are most important. So number 3, section 7, number 3, this is your policy on who has to connect. This draft represents the recommendation of the committee and your technical team. In this draft, within the surface area boundaries, no existing on-site sewage system may continue to be operated, expanded, or replaced, and no new on-site sewage system may be established and operated unless. So we have option A, This is option A for keeping your system if you're within the sewer service area. This isn't all of. So option 1 is A, and you got to meet all 3 of these criteria. First, principal structure and existing or proposed sewage system are entirely and fully outside the 500-year floodplain and the state river corridor. That's test number 1. And the state has not at any time constituted a failed system as defined herein. And properties demonstrated to have sufficient capacity to support a fully compliant replacement wastewater system. A professional engineer who also actually has expertise in on-site wastewater has said, yes, the subject property can support a fully compliant replacement system.
Okay.
Those are the recommended criteria. If you meet all 3 of those, outside the floodplain and the river corridor, you've never been a failed system, which doesn't mean you couldn't have had a repair, as you pointed out. And your system also, you could also support a fully compliant replacement. Good for you. You may keep or implement a new on-site wastewater system. I'm going to turn to my friends at Stone Environmental, for how many of these we think we have in the sewer service area at this point. Pete, do we actually have a count?
I'm sorry, I wasn't. You're looking for a count of exempt properties, Julie Beth?
How many do we think, how many parcels do we think could actually meet the exemption A with the 3 criteria?
I don't know. I can get back to you in a few minutes if you want.
So your other option besides A, and A is really about physical location outside floodplain and river corridor. You could also meet B. That you've got a system constructed after September 2007 when the new updated rules took effect. And that has not at any time constituted a failed system. And our thinking is, well, if it got permitted after 2007, it's got a replacement area permitted as well. Let those continue to operate. So those are the two different pathways for people. Otherwise, you're going to connect when the system's built.
Just help me understand, option A, section 3, the need for it to have a replacement zone. The replacement zone, wouldn't the logical choice there just be to connect at time of system failure?
I mean,
Seems redundant to require a replacement zone.
it's basically saying, if you've got enough property, I mean, sure, you could make them connect if they want to replace. What about expansion?
They'd have to buy the EUs, they'd have to buy the units and connect.
That would be much more stringent than this. Your scenario is, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but for everybody's sake, if little 3 goes away and people have to connect when they expand, A is allowing people to expand or build new if they can meet all of those criteria.
Absolutely.
If it's the desire of the select board to say, well, you can keep it for now, but you make that bigger or you try to replace it, you're going to have to connect instead. That would be a different policy choice than what we've drafted.
Right. And why would that be worse necessarily?
Only to the people who really, really, really don't want to have to connect, don't want to have to connect to the wastewater system.
I feel like that this is more restrictive. I mean, I can think of maybe 3 properties in the surface zone that would meet A if we dropped 3.
Okay.
And, you know, if for whatever reason that system failed or they decided to add on to their home, there is no option for you to replace a wastewater system. You need connecting. And
But what if they said, but wait a minute, I've got land, I could do a full, you know, I want to add that,
If they can do an on-site wastewater system outside of,
They can keep what they have now, but they can't create. Comes up doing. I mean, really, if they connect now, it's free.
Yes, well, that's the intelligent choice, and really, I'm just beating a dead horse here. I'm trying to be devil's advocate here and make sure that we have all our i's crossed and t's dotted.
totally.
I'm not trying to be a thorn in the side or stick in the mud, I just,
What you're saying, it would be a free connection, but who's paying for the plumbers? And the materials?
Yeah, the grant.
At the initial phase of construction, that is a covered expense.
So from the house to the tank and from the tank to the main line is all going to be paid by the grant.
Only if you do it when you're building the system.
and if you try to connect on day two, you get to pay for the tank, the pump station, and all the excavation and the pipe and the
And
plumbers.
And all the archaeology people to make, you have to make sure there's nothing there that will interfere with it.
That's not likely to be for an individual connection. You get to do that when you build the big system with federal money. But yeah, that's the incentive. Is do it now because it's an eligible cost when you're in that construction phase.
Lynette just chimed in an important addition to all that. You also have to get a permit to make the connection.
Yes, you do. And you know what? It'd be really helpful, Lynette, because we can't see the chat very well and we don't know when you're chatting. If you maybe raise a hand or be willing to like speak up a little bit, because I know you're critiquing as we go. So it's
Okay, no problem.
Could somebody read it? Because I can't.
yeah, we can't read that.
Yeah. Let me see if I can. I just pasted in the failed system definitions that are in the rule, and Ashok gave you the citation if that's what you want to do.
Read that.
In chapter 1.
That's okay. We'll have to go back and make all that later. So folks here on the. The idea was with that, you know, yeah, and if you're lucky enough, you've got all that land, it's fine. Stay off the system, you can do a new one. And not to make things more difficult. The post 2007 systems, and they've got a replacement building, keep moseying along their own.
Should they
Should they
choose
want
to.
to, should they choose to take that on? So that, I mean, that's the basic, that's a very important choice and something you're gonna have to take to your, you know, your property owners. The only thing I'll then note under 4, variances or new encroachments prohibited, is that policy says if you would need any kind of a variance from DEC to add capacity or change your system, or if you would encroach in any way into a wellhead protection zone on another property, no way. You're either stuck with what you got or you connect. Which is usually a responsible policy too. Okay. So that's where those are. And I think, Pete, if we can try to figure, you know, we've been trying to figure out exactly who. It's hard to know exactly who would be subject to either the A pathway or the B pathway. But there are a few.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a bunch of spreadsheets. I could probably sit here and try to figure them out for everybody in terms of the numbers you're actually asking for, Julie Beth, but I'd probably easier for me to get back to everybody later.
Yeah, I think it's going to be important for town meeting to be able to say, we think it's 3 or 4 properties, or to know that when the property owners start needing to sign easements and such. Anything else on that one? And Michael, I really appreciate your thoroughness and your knowledge on this, because this is the hardest parts of it.
And my only thoughts on the whole thing is that it's a tough pill to swallow for some old time Vermonters that don't want to kind of breathe into the new century. And removing the illusion of choice from them makes them all the more stubborn. If we tell them that you will do this, they will dig their heels in and say no even louder.
I think a lot of people on the system will have no choice because their septic's flooded.
Right, they're either failed or they're in the flood zone anyway, and you don't have a pathway, this is it. But for the handful, whatever that small number is, that have a currently not failed system outside of the flood zone, you know, I do have an issue with the requirement for a replacement zone, just because I don't see why you need to have a replacement zone and the ability to hook up at your own cost later.
That's true. Yeah,
That's my only issue.
I think that's a very, very valid critique.
Well, the goal is to get users on the system, right? So if true, they're gonna have to spend the money later, which is a lot of money that could be granted now, but
Let them make that choice. If they want to make that mistake, let them.
fair enough.
Right. So moving on to number 5. That's application for connection. And 5A is the statement that if you connect while we're building the system, that will happen at no cost to you. You will not pay a sewer connection fee. You are not responsible to schedule and pay for the physical construction of the building, sewer, house connection, or municipal sewer extension. That's your 5A is your free at construction statement. 5B says suckers, any owner who applies for and receives approval for final capacity after initial date of initial construction operation shall pay applicable fees and charges, that's your town charges, and shall be responsible for scheduling of and payment for physical construction of building sewer. In addition, they would need a state permit and all the other fun stuff.
Good incentive.
This is your incentive. For goodness sake, folks, do it now. Number 6 is important. 6 is the one that says, notwithstanding anything else in this section, the board may require a connection if you are wholly or partially within the service area if following conditions apply. And this isn't, okay. A and B is an and. C isn't, and then C is an or. So if you get somebody who they have a system that is a threat to public health, safety, or welfare, including but not limited to discharge to surface groundwater, and construction of a replacement system would not meet 7.3A or B. In other words, it could be within the floodplain, within the river corridor. It's not a post-2007 system that you can fix. If you can't meet those exemption criteria, you must connect. In addition, if you have a property, and this is unfortunately not uncommon, you've got a property that has any kind of a system or that's failed, or you've got significant issues with it, and the owner cannot or will not deal with it, the town can, upon notice and going through procedures, physically connect that system and add a lien to the property. You don't want to have to do that, but every now and then that'll happen. Hopefully not here. So that's what 6C allows you to do. Fun times. Okay, and then 7 is the procedures by which you would sort of involuntary connection procedures. You give notice to the property owner, you get 45 days. There's a cease and desist order. You work with Vermont DEC on that, and you get an abatement order of some sort. And then at some point, the town would take an action, schedule the engineer and plumber, and connect the system. No fun, but that's how that works. Um, 8A and B. This ends up being important. What the wastewater committee has recommended. Determining the flow that's attached to the system. So how many gallons per day are we going to charge the dentist's office or the post office to be connected to the system? Or conversely, how many gallons would the owners of the old Nazarene church need to convert it to apartments or do something else? How many gallons do we need to know about for the wonderful plans for the schoolhouse? We're basically saying for anything but a primary residential dwelling unit, you use the Vermont environmental protection, you use the Vermont rules. I'm so old, I still say environmental protection. You use the Vermont rules. Residential. The proposal here is for residential users to have a set flow that is somewhat less than it would be if you went strictly by the rules. Studio and 1 bedroom, 105 gallons per day. 2 bedroom, 175. 3 or more bedroom, 245. Now, in addition to that, in that table, we've got little 2, 3, and 4 underneath. This was a subject of important discussion among the committee members. What do you do if somebody has an accessory dwelling unit? Somebody doesn't, I'm a mother-in-law, so I don't like this, but mother-in-law apartment, granny flat. Somebody's got a trailer out back, separate dwelling unit. Somebody's doing a short-term rental, Airbnb for rail trail people. So little 2 says, if you separate a house into multiple dwelling units, you need to get capacity for each independent living unit. Number 2, or little 3, you get a permit for an accessory unit. You're going to create it in a garage, or you're going to do it in a shed or barn. You buy additional flow for that. If you are doing short-term rental, you're going to have flow for your primary residential, and then you go back to the rules for the state rules for how that would be treated. And that's to make sure that you don't get people kind of going with a fixed rate and then having 3 or 4 units that are really using that system.
Where did the numbers in the table come from? Are those an engineered thing or?
Thanks.
Again, I do hate to be a stickler, I'm just curious.
That's important. The 105 for studio 1 bedroom, 175 for 2 bedroom.
The 3 bedroom, 245.
Yeah.
I thought most on-site wastewater just had to.
Yes.
For 480 on a 3 bedroom.
Sorry, Julie Beth, I'm a little surprised you're asking me on this because they're kind of random, right? Like,
No,
they're just trying to be equitable.
It was based on the number of people. It was based on an estimate of occupancy in those units rather than bedrooms.
There's a change, I think, Michael, what you're referring to, there's a change in the wastewater rules.
Yeah.
For the sizing of a single unit that happens around, I think it's around 5 units connected to the same system. Peter probably has that better, but where sort of the idea that not everyone is going to be having their peak use at the same time gets you some economies of scale. And so it drops from that 480 to 245.
Yes, and so, and the other corollary, if when you are managing like a sewer system, so during my reign of terror in South Burlington, you certainly don't require 245 gallons per day for 3 bedrooms. is much lower because these are conservative for on-site systems. You have to build in that extra. You're on a giant sewer system. You can go with something much closer to metered flow. We're assuming a maximum of 1.5 persons in a studio or one bedroom, 2.5 in a two bedroom. And this keeps extra capacity available in your system to support other users. And it's more, since you're going to have a little bit more leeway, as Seth was saying, comfortable going with the number of expected occupancy rather than design flow for onset. Does that make more sense?
It does. I just wanted to see
Yeah.
why the 245 wasn't 480. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you.
So can I just chime in? The biggest reason for these is to spread it out and make it more equitable so that each of the apartments aren't paying a full unit rate like it were a house.
It is important to make sure that each individual dwelling unit is paying it. So if somebody adds an accessory unit, you pay for the studio or one bedroom, as well as your primary dwelling. Otherwise, you're going to have an incentive for people to have, oh no, it's just my 1 3-bedroom house with a trailer out back and an accessory unit. Those are independent dwellings and they should each pay their fee. So that is 8 little b. Okay, section 8 is all the technical fun of building sewers and connections. You may not mess with the system or connect illicitly unless you connect during connection. And this is also section 8, number 2, little c. As part of the initial construction of its sewage works for the service area, the town may at its expense initially construct a portion or the whole of any building sewer to the extent and manner determined by the board. That's giving yourselves the authority to include that in your project cost of construction. 3, I shudder to think how much time we spent talking about this under 3 and 4. Generally speaking, you want a building sewer unless you've got some funky, situation where you need to share a building sewer. Generally, you don't want to reuse existing building sewers again, unless an engineer has tested it and it's sufficient. It's not likely, but it can happen. Then we've got technical standards, elevation, clear water connections. You do not want people putting foundation drains or sumps in your sanitary sewer system. That was a hot no. Plumbing code applies. And when you do get new connections, you want to have them inspected to make absolutely certain that people are connecting the right thing to your sewer system according to standards. So that is all 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Questions or remarks? So section 9 is where we start to talk about system capacity. A lot of communities, especially bigger ones with bigger systems, will keep a reserve capacity. So examples, you might reserve capacity for a downtown district where you're anticipating you want more housing and you want to make sure that there's sewer capacity for additional density in that downtown. You might have an affordable housing project that's making its way through development permitting and you want to reserve capacity for that. Should Wolcott reserve some of the capacity in the system? That's really up to you. It's hard to think it's going to be completely oversubscribed, or holding allowances for the town buildings, hopefully for the school. If there's some objective that you think it would serve, you can create a town reserve capacity. Otherwise, it may not be necessary.
So what if we hold a reserve capacity, but then there's some great development that wants to go on into the district and there isn't enough capacity at that point? Can we just give it out, give it away?
You can, yes. You would, whoever the Board of Sewer Commissioners is, would make a decision to allocate from that reserve capacity to X development. And generally, you're going to be doing first come, first served. What you would do with that reserve capacity is have a motion of the Board of Sewer Commissioners to release a certain portion of it, so that X development could get hold of it. I mean, if you go back to the battle days of the 90s and growth management and Taft Corners, dogs and cats living together in mass hysteria, there were very elaborate provisions in the Essex and Williston sewer ordinances about when and under what circumstances that town reserve could be sold out. I mean, it may not be a bad idea to keep a reserve. And if after 2 years, it's like, what are we doing this for? You just turn it back into uncommitted reserve capacity by a motion of the board.
By keeping the reserve, are we paying for that?
Yes.
I think we should have some reserve though, because we don't know.
Yeah, I think we should. I want to formulate all the questions in my mind first.
Schoolhouse or something that MSI may want to put in there, or now that they'll have a wastewater system.
Yep.
And with the exception of the town footing the bill for the reserve capacity until it's allocated, there's no harm in doing it. The board can always dole some out should they choose.
So when do we find out that number? That's partly going to be when we really have a handle on what the permitted number is going to be for the system, and how many people are likely to sign up. Okay. The way this is drafted, again, is uncommitted reserve, first come, first served. Now, here's the section 10. This is on my page 17. It's somewhere. Have you guys seen it? 17. Okay. Here's where the fun starts. This is where, unless you have a procedure and time frames, you can get some mischief with groups and property owners holding preliminary allocations of that uncommitted reserve indefinitely. It enhances their property value. We know we have 6,000 gallons for the town of Wolcott. Well, if they're going to do that, either connect to the system and start paying, or you want to hold it, you start paying for it. What this section sets out is a draft of timeframes within which people can have a preliminary allocation where it's, yeah, we'll give you that capacity. We'll give you some time to go get your permits. You don't have to pay for it yet. But at a certain point, you either give it back or you start paying. We're calling that final capacity allocation. So section 10 is the gory details of how that would work. The way this is drafted, and this is number 3, duration of approval. Preliminary approval is good for a year under this. Unless you want to come back in, and this is now 5A little 1. Page 18. 18. Okay, 5A little 1 is it's 11 months in and you can't get your act together and you just don't have your permits yet, or there's been some delay. As long as you do it 30 days before your expiration, you can request another year to hold that preliminary allocation. But the board may at its discretion refuse issuance of the extension if the applicant has not demonstrated progress towards the utilization of the capacity. Gave you the allocation. You went off and joined the circus for 11 months. Now you're back. You've done nothing to advance your project. You don't have design drawings. You don't have to give that allocation. You can make them apply again. But they didn't run away to join the circus. Something went on. They've made a good faith effort. They found, I don't know, buried treasure on the side of the hill, or something went wrong. You can give them another year with that preliminary. And the idea is in land use permits that the preliminary should be enough to go to Act 250 or whatever it's called now. Our new friends on the, yes, it's still Act 250, but what are our new friends? Our friends are now the land use review board. They met for the first time today. You can go to them and that should be sufficient demonstration for them to get a permit without having to pay. So that is an important piece of this. When they want the final, and I also want to premise this by saying, if somebody's doing an accessory unit on their site, they're really just going to go straight to a final allocation. They're going to get their building permit, final allocation, pay the fees, and connect. So they don't have to go through all this preliminary stuff. Preliminary is for the bigger stuff where there's still uncertainty and time involved in getting that permit. Most of the time, people will go straight to number 7, which is final approval for capacity. It basically says, here, you are now authorized to connect to the system, but you got to start paying. Final allocation is good for 3 years. You have 3 years to connect. The board can extend that for a maximum of another 2 years. You also get, this is 8C. You can give a longer time horizon, but it's got to be for cause, because you just don't want to be tying that up for so long. And then there's amendment procedures under 9 and such. That makes sense? Yes. Yeah. So, the only other thing there is also an allowance for financial hardship. If there is some major issue there. Okay. Section 11 is for subdivisions. I doubt you'll ever use it. When Dave Rue reviewed this language for the Westford Ordinance, it's in statute, but he couldn't think of a case, neither of us could think of a case where it had been used. All right, then we get to Article 4, which is all about the money, sewer use, charges, and fund management. Section 12.1 is the authority to establish both a user charge, that's your sewer bill based on flow for residential units, and also other fees like application fees, connection fees, the sort of basic mechanics, again, like cat licenses. Those are going to be adopted probably annually by resolution of the board, either select board or board of sewer commissioners. Something that a sewer commissioner board does pretty much annually in Vermont. 2 authorizes you to come up with a sewer connection fee. Now, those recognize that the town has to process the application, have it properly reviewed by an engineer, have it, there needs to be an inspection, you need to verify things. And there's a cost to that to the town. Your sewer connection fee in larger systems can be very large, recognizing that the town is making an investment now and is paying the cost of, to keep that system operating and on standby for you. Sewer connection fees often are, in the couple $1,000s per unit. You will have to make a decision if that's too much, but at minimum, it should cover your out-of-pocket costs as the town to verify somebody's connection and process that application. So I'm gonna put in, that's a bridge to cross when you come to it. Okay. 3 is all the fun stuff. This is where you figure out who you're charging how much to discharge into your system. We've talked with the committee about a flat fee for residential units, and then a fee based on design flow for non-residential, and then the town certainly paying for its own buildings and that uncommitted reserve. We don't quite have enough information yet on how many users exactly we expect to come up with a final set of numbers. But what's important to think about is every year there's going to be a nut to cover of cost to keep the sewer system functioning. Say it's roughly $65,000 plus anything you want to put in a reserve fund. Your reserve fund by state statute can be no more than 15%. That's the maximum of your annual budget that you can put into the reserve fund. Vermont's legislature, in its wisdom, is preventing situations where you get these utilities with huge cash balances, and they're like, well, I don't know where all that money came from. I'm dealing with that right now, and it's not pretty. There's a political outcry saying, don't you raise our rates until you spend down all that cash you're sitting on. No Vegas junket money sitting in a big account. So you're limited to, about if the cost to operate the system is $65,000, you can charge about another 10.
That's why all those towns in the state and their infinite wisdom haven't figured out. You know why all those people get these $1 million bonds people have to pay at once? It's because the 15% doesn't allow you to save from when you're gonna take the money out.
It's true. It's true. There's balance to be struck. Got a bond for stuff. But you can get absolute public outrage if you've got all that money and then you're like, well, we're gonna have to raise rates, or we didn't raise rates, and now we've got a bond and we were sitting on the money. I mean, it's not.
You don't get mad either way. They get mad if you don't have the money. They get mad when their rates go up.
Yep.
Or if you don't put any aside, it's like, why you have money aside? It's collecting interest for anyone to have to fix it.
Yeah.
Or upgrade it.
Or upgrade.
Or pay for any new state regs that come along.
Yep. We're estimating Stone Environmental, and Pete and the team there know as much as anybody does. We're estimating that the annual operating cost of the system will be about $65,000 when you get it going. So you could put away 9750 in a reserve. Yeah, it would take a while to get to the point of actually being able to buy a lot of equipment.
It's not like a bigger town that has the.
No. So, all that being said, and you're absolutely right, Al. All that being said, you're gonna have, somebody has to come up with 75 grand a year to operate the system. If 20% of that is town reserve, and we do this based on flow, if we did everybody based on flow, the town's allocation would be 20%. But if you want to keep your residential connections at a fixed fee, what that also means is you're only going to get so much income from them. It's going to be the number of each kind of residential unit times whatever flat fee you charge them per year. Then the rest of it has to be covered by some combination of the non-residential users and taxpayers, general taxes. So, and that's, it's not wrong at all to keep it affordable, to really have a focus on keeping it affordable for your residential folks in the village. The more you maximize the number of connections to that system, the better. But what we have in section 3, determination of sewer use charge, and then C is a flat charge for individual dwelling units. And it's basically, this would set by ordinance that each dwelling unit authorized for occupancy shall be charged a flat rate per month based on number of bedrooms as set forth in flows for residential users, that little table. And the flat charge per year is determined by the board by resolution. Then what you have to do, this is why D3 is in green, if it's printed in green. Then you got to figure out how do you divvy up the rest of the cost for the folks who have allocations. And do you want to just say, do you want to make the denominator the total system capacity? Do you want to make it the share that's not? Anyway, there are a lot of different ways to do the math once we know how much the residential users will be. So we're getting there on numbers, but this is the section of the ordinance where you're going to say how you'll set that rate. Makes sense? Because you could take the town capacity right off the top. 20% of the cost the town will pay. We'll hold 20% of capacity and we'll take 20% of the cost. Then you figure out, okay, what's left of the cost? 75,000 times 2, you're paying 15,000. Okay, then we got 60 grand to cover. The residential users are paying 15,000, and the rest of that capacity has to go on the non-residential users, including the town buildings. So once we get farther with the connections and who we think will connect, we'll give you some options with the numbers attached. But that's the math you're going to have to do to keep the residential at a fixed fee. Questions?
The more people you get on, the more economical it is for everybody.
100%.
The incentive for the people who don't need to be on is good because they don't have that expense for the rest of their life to maintain their own septic system.
Yep.
I'm hoping you don't see it that way.
The flip side of that is that if they choose not to connect, that means that the general tax population gets to pay more.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a presentation at one of these special meetings? I think the one we had in this room, where there was a proposed fee if everything went according to plan, and hopes and trust and pixie dust and all of the above. that there was a user fee that was affordable, but also covered all of the operating costs without having to lean on the taxpayers? Or am I making that up in my head?
I mean, I think,
No, you did, and we've never said the taxpayers would have to pay for anything other than the,
The municipal building.
the municipal buildings.
That's what I remember.
Yes.
Just want to make sure my memory was working.
No, that was always what we stressed all along.
so the option where the town doesn't pay for doesn't pay for the reserve capacity, pays its fees.
No, I didn't say that. The
Yeah.
town will pay for what, but the only thing taxpayers would pay would be for town capacity.
Okay.
And,
Including reserve.
yeah,
Well, if the town pays the reserve and its own fees, and we have
well, we
the
always.
residential at 40 and 25. You do get a pretty realistic fee for like the store. It's just that we can, we really want to see how many people, the kicker is if people just don't want to connect, or and the people, if all the people who can say no, and then we got buyouts, and that number goes down, then it gets sticky, especially in your first couple of years.
It gets to, I think, the discussion you had at the beginning about the number three in the connection policy. And I think that
Yeah.
the flip side of the individual question is the public question of then the potential subsidy and then the potential grand list impact of declining value if something doesn't have a functional system. But this is getting to that difficult math.
We're getting close. We've got new spreadsheets and we've talked to some of the property owners. We're getting close to knowing how that will work out. So that's where it goes.
So right now, with what you have for information and data, what would the cost for a single dwelling, one bedroom?
Well, that can be that under this rate and all the direction we've had went from the committee. We've been estimating that at what, 40 a month for single family?
No, it goes by bedrooms.
For 3 bedroom, I should have said that. For a three bedroom plus your basic rates.
I think 1 bedroom was 25. Did it say that here?
2 or fewer, we had at 25, and 3 or more, we had at 40 per month.
Yeah, that's my memory from the presentation.
Yep.
That's what we're trying to stick with, but like, still, we need to see who's gonna connect.
And so, if you did it purely based on flow, and which is what in big systems, we come up with a per gallon rate, and that's what you pay. That would be 95 a month for 245 gallons rather than 40. So it's pretty big subsidy. For units with 2 bedrooms, 68 a month rather than 25. So it does amount, and it amounts to a pretty good breakdown of the cost for your residential, which is not wrong given your circumstances and your community goals. So, but it's definitely a subsidy. And then you shift that that ups the cost of what town pays for its reserve capacity in its buildings and the non-residential pay. But I still think you're going to be in a realistic range.
Well, seeing as how I may be one of those out of everyone on this board that would have to be on the system, not by choice, I feel the whole community gets a benefit. So why isn't some of the non-residential in the town picking up some of this?
Oh, their bill is gonna be big, non-residential.
Yeah, non-residential will be.
It's huge.
I think you're thinking non-service area, right? But
Right.
you're going to say people like me.
Yeah,
should have to carry some of the burden. I think that we will when we're paying for reserve funds and town capacity. And we are going to be carrying some of that weight.
But how much?
Well, we don't have the numbers yet when the
I mean,
numbers come, we'll decide.
You're saying I could be paying up to 500 a year. And you're gonna get $10?
No. We're gonna keep paying. You said 15,000 maybe.
The town, I mean, if you end up
And then
paying,
97,
I would also be included as part of the town, correct?
yes.
So I'm gonna be paying share. So to me, I'm paying a double debt.
Well, that may be true. You're also not going to be on the hook to replace my leach field when it fails.
That is the big thing. Anyone that is on the system, is not a house outside this village that, was it 30 grand now? To replace these things now plus? So,
depending where you are, yeah.
and what was the figure if you get a 30-year on that? It's like, how much a month?
Oh,
10 years?
Yeah, if you pay 30 grand at 7.5% interest on a 15-year loan. Oh, it's not pretty. It's, you know, so,
Well, you have to remember, some of us have reserved funds of our own.
yeah,
So
sure.
we would just,
Well, sure, that's fine. The only possible comparison, I can either do the present value of that, you know, or the future value of that, or what it is if you have to borrow. If you just take it out of capital, then, you know, we do a future value of that chunk of money now as the comparison. You know, which is where a lot of people are, with flood damage and basements and new foundations and such.
see, I'm not in the flood zone. I'm on the northern side, like 8 other buildings. But I don't know if they have the capacity, they have met the 2007. Where the, you know, the permitting 2007
Was it
permitting
permitted after 2007?
was.
Okay, then you're probably.
No, I mean, it's before. A lot of them were before. I only know one.
Yeah. It's, I mean, septic, if you borrowed 30 grand on the longest term at 7.5, it's $278 a month.
And something that's harder to calculate is the increase in property value for a potential buyer, knowing that they will never in the future ever have to pay for a failed system. You know, everything from the pipe that leaves your house to the pump, from the pump to the leach field is on the sewer commission's dime to fix. You know, there's some value in that too.
So you're saying, let's say a lightning strike happens 2 years after it's installed. The whole electrical system is blown. Is it going to be up to the property owner to pay for that, or?
That's a fantastic question that I don't know. How is this ordinance drafted when it comes to maintenance and repair of, you know, like he said, if the pump quits, if a residential.
If it's part of your system. I mean, if it's part of the actual wastewater system, it's post-built, it has come forth from your domicile into a tank. Those tanks, those step tanks are public infrastructure. The pump goes on one of the step tanks, it's on the system, not on you.
So the homeowner owns the length of pipe between house and.
Yeah, and you'll have an easement that says where it quits and where the public system begins. Yes.
And that figure of the $75,000 a year includes a line item of incidental
And
replacement insurance, all of those kinds of costs. So
But that reserve fund also adding up so you can cover it.
Turns out in the last decade that you guys have been planning this, you have crossed all your I's and dotted all your T's.
These types of systems are increasingly common across the United States, and a lot of bad behavior and things have been worked through. So interestingly enough, the future value is 5% interest over 30 years if you, well, probably even do it 15 years, making the septic system payments. If you took your money, your 30 grand and spent it on a new system, future value of that is 74,000 invested at 5% of the time. So it's a hit. It's a hit to people who, either way.
Start when you get the free hookup.
I'll just also chime in real quickly that
Yeah.
$30,000 on a challenging lot with, you know, shallow bedrock or site constraints is, I've seen systems recently this year closer to $50,000 with permitting and everything. So $30,000, unfortunately, with the way materials and labor and everything is going, it's just $30,000 just doesn't get you nearly what it did, say, 5 years ago.
Reluctant to add this, but I'm going to, which is that another thing that has happened in the last 5 years is construction loans are harder, especially for, you know, for home buyers. You know, like TD Bank does not do construction loans as part of a mortgage loan.
They won't do construction permanent anymore?
No, they won't. So
That sucks.
that means that, you know, the buyer pool, if you don't have a functioning septic system, is smaller. And probably rules out a lot of first-time home buyers who don't have the ability to do, you know, a dual loan kind of thing. You can ask me how I learned about that. The answer will actually be why I bought a home up in Johnson instead of not being able to get a construction loan for on-site replacement and other repairs for property.
I can't believe they're not doing 203Ks anymore.
It's wild. Yeah. Welcome to 2025.
They must have decided that the risk analysis was like way too high for default on it.
Yeah, that's exactly why.
Yeah. Well, nationally, construction loans are, the interest rate is so outrageous, right? Yes. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of concern about that. Well, on a brighter note, section 13 authorizes but does not require your board, this is page 24?
Yeah.
Authorizes but does not require your board to establish that dedicated fund. And again, 24 VSA 5616 says up to 15% and no more. And we've sort of punted to 2, 3, and 4. Well, but we've punted to 2, creation of a fund policy. That is something that your board would do. If you decide to create that dedicated fund, which is, I think, a good idea. You'd need to have a policy as part of your bylaws that addresses A through E. And yeah. So then section 14, applicability of charges and billing. This basically says, this is what the town's going to pay for. Right now it's drafted under B1 and 2 so that you would pay the cost of that reserve capacity. And anything that the town owns and operates that's connected to the system. You also end up by default paying the cost of preliminary capacity allocations. Those will give you this, you've got 2 years to do it maximum, unless you come back and show us that you didn't join the circus. After which time the holders of those final capacity allocations have to pay the associated sewer charge. So that's a disincentive to hold capacity without having, knowing what you're going to do to operate the system. You also, the board would have the authority to waive or modify. If you gave say you gave a final approval for an affordable housing, and then they came up, they hit some hitch. You have the authority to say, okay, we'll give you a 6-month grace period before you have to start paying fees. So you have that authority, and that's under 1C. two, I want to point this out. The big sewer systems have elaborate policies for surcharging discharges, what we call high strength waste. Ask me about 2001, when we got to negotiate that with Magic Hat to the Bartlett Bay wastewater system. And I was informed, besides being the angel of death for most reasons, I was informed that I was adding to the cost of beer, and didn't I know that beer makes people happy? So
Killer of joy.
yes, in so many ways, my children were like, yeah, we knew that already. So this ordinance has not been written with specific provisions for higher strength users. Now, they can take many forms. Brewery waste is unique. Pete and I have dealt with that a great deal in Wastefield and other places. You can have some types of residential where you get, for example, senior living, or you can get variable waste streams. This is stuff that our good wastewater engineers know. I have not drafted all of that for you. Instead, this is 2A surcharges for high strength waste. All I'm going to recommend is not knowing who's going to do what. If you start to hear rumblings about distilleries, senior living, medical facilities, etc., you pick up the phone and you call Pete, and we work out some kind of policy on high strength waste. But you would have the authority here to identify, to require identification of that waste stream, to get data on it. And if it's going to fool with the operation of the system in terms of increased energy demand or pretreatment, you can add a surcharge to their fee. But I don't think it's worth time and money to try to anticipate what could come in, given that you just don't know. And those can be handled on a case-by-case basis. Now, there is another issue, and that is grease traps. Under section 16, it's going down a couple pages. And Michael, this is good stuff for you to take a look at. Article 5, this is to get to the uses. Article 5, use of the public sewer and waste restrictions. Number 2, this is page 29. Interceptors may be required in construction.
And make sure they're pumped out regularly.
Yes. This is all in here. 2, 3, and 4 deals with interceptors. The town would have the authority under this to require them, and that they be constructed properly, and that owners are responsible for maintaining them, and that you will, what I'm suggesting here, you are a very small community in a small system. Rather than stipulating it must be this report on this piece of paper on this day and this phase of the moon, work that out and put it in their permit conditions. But it's definitely the authority to require those grease traps is here. And you want to do that. You do not want that in your system.
Forgive me for not remembering, but as a part of the application process, wasn't there an engineering requirement where the engineer would determine that we needed a grease trap?
You have to stipulate it. And if you see it on there and it's like, oh, we forgot, you know, then they can put it on. But yes, they have to you have to get an idea of the waste strength. If it's anything but domestic, you got to deal with that. One caveat I'll give you, if anybody is, because this, I have a battle scar from this one. Someone is doing home catering or creating culinary oils in their kitchen, is unscrupulous about it. You find out people are doing food-related uses at home. They may need a phone call from the Board of Sewer Commissioners to talk about just checking.
In order for anyone to do anything like that, they would have had to go to our zoning office to get their home occupation permit.
Yep,
So
that's why you require home occupation permits. It will need to be a thing in the home occupation if you're doing anything food related at home. to check in on the wastewater. Just saying. Okay. So that is as much as I would suggest doing with high strength waste and grease traps. I'm back on page 26, payment of charges, delinquency and billing. This is administratively for the town. You figure out what billing cycle, penalty for late payment and delinquency is appropriate given what you do for other stuff. And we get into the discharge restrictions. Pre-treatment and flow equalization, that would be if you get something really big. Flow equalization, monitoring and testing. Again, these are just giving yourselves the authority that you have in statute to work with your engineer and your maintenance team. And again, and also to that effect of high strength waste. Acceptance, nothing shall be construed as prohibiting a special agreement between the town and an owner through which an industrial waste of unusual strength or character may be accepted, as long as you don't do anything dumb. So you'll have the ability to work with users of the system to come up to a special agreement, which is what we did with Magic Hat back in the day. Six is no person shall maliciously, willfully, or negligently break or damage. Don't pour paint down the drain. Don't come after you. Your select board should. Do you have a health officer designated? Usually, it's not the administrator. That's something like so. There's a health officer. 2 is important, and we spend a lot of time on this in Westford: liability and indemnification. That has been cautiously reviewed. And your health officer does need to have access to the records in the town of the easements that each property owner will have to grant to connect to the system, so that they know what they've got.
This right of entry,
Yep.
31, that is to the interior of the homes as well, or just to the property? It's entry necessary, really necessary to inspect, observe, measure, sample, and test. Reasonable person would infer that would mean when you check traps in sink fixtures in a home.
Yeah.
Okay.
We did have a discussion with Dave Rue about that and about the liability and indemnification. This is all consistent with what PASIF and everybody else says is within the authority and within your insurance as the town.
And actually, I think that the Vermont wastewater rules have, I think when you apply for one of those permits,
I believe you.
they have that as well.
Yes. Yeah. What do you think, Jeff? So that is the tour of your wastewater ordinance draft. You'll do it, and yeah. The bylaws are a much simpler document. We can approach these from Northfield, where I spent a couple of years working on that kind of thing. As drafted, the board would be 5 members, 2 select board members among them. And then we wrote complicated things so that you could start to get staggered terms. So that one member, you do an initial board, you got 2 selectables. You do 1 1-year term, 1 2-year term, 1 3-year term. And then after that, as those terms start to stagger, you do 3-year terms, so that not everybody is up all at once. You're allowed to reappoint. No term limits. Organization officers' responsibilities. And the way these bylaws are drafted, It's my understanding your library trustees basically approve bills and forward them to select board. So this is set up so that the sewer commissioners would approve bills and then forward them to you for disbursements, to approve disbursements. If you ever borrowed money for the wastewater system, your treasurer of the sewer board would sign those notes. Regular meetings. 3 members is a quorum. You can do electronic under, 1 BSA 312. Participation in voting, all that other good stuff. And I also appended the statutory authorization to the back of the box. And you are so far ahead of so many other communities and actually even contemplating bylaws for the commission before setting it up.
I see an exciting 2 years for the initial board.
Yeah.
You have a lot of rest anymore. Then you wonder what Donald Trump. Don't want to go that way. He'd be a martyr forever. To the crazies. He'd be.
Honestly, there's a lot of stuff. I thought when Warren Village was actually built and connected, it was just going to be endless. But once it was once everybody understood that it was coming and got over the idea, the construction process was the smoothest part. People were like, okay, fine, I can do my thing. Here's the easement, etc. I'm a little concerned about making sure the town has sufficient legal services to get these easements done and executed. Stitzel's office is not taking any new work.
Is David Polo also not wanting to do the easements? Or?
He did not.
I didn't ask him about the easement.
Okay. I mean, there's nothing weird or difficult. There's just a lot of explaining. There's
Easements
paperwork
for
that was
me for
recorded.
bridges. I don't see why you couldn't do that. Yeah, construction easements.
Well, there's also the permanent easement. These are
Yeah.
construction and
So
permanent easements.
construction is temporary and permanent.
Yep. You'd mentioned another attorney. Dave mentioned someone who's new in Central Vermont who can do this kind of work.
It's worth reaching out to both.
I think we should reach out to them because it's a process that needs to, you gotta be able to answer people's questions. Respectfully and thoroughly when you show up to do these connections and such. It's not immediately necessary, but I think the sooner we get some recommendations, the better.
So the original plan was, from the committee, was that we would have this workshop, this opportunity for the select board to review it, ask concerns, additions, familiarize themselves with it. And then we were going to, at our February meeting on the 5th, put that out as our first, public notice, but
Yep.
it seems like we're not ready for that.
Oh,
I wouldn't want to put it out before it's been reviewed.
yeah, I mean, that's really up to you. We also need to I think I have enough direction to fill in a lot of the blanks. You can always amend it after it's adopted. But if you want to be able to say to the community, we've had an attorney review it on behalf of, specifically on behalf of the town of Wolcott, we need to get that done. So.
We don't have blank spaces in here though that need to be filled in.
I think based on tonight, we can fill in. We can pretty much fill them in. If you want to do the 20% reserve, just for the sake of argument, as for getting out the gate. Pete, do you see any conflict between a 20% town reserve and the people we expect to connect?
No, I think 20% is probably reasonable.
Great. Based on that input, I think the real question is, do we let people keep their systems who don't have a fully compliant replacement? Grant older systems, that 3A little 3.
It'll just ask for trouble further down the road for them as well. I had the question I asked, and I don't really have a horse in the race. I won't be living in the service area. So it truly doesn't matter a great deal to me. It's the only kind of big red sticking flag that I saw.
Okay.
So that would be like a board vote on that?
No, I can draft it up. I mean, all of this is we delete little 3, and that just basically means that anybody who expands anything.
Can you go back to what you
Sure.
were meeting?
Okay, so this is page 12.
Right? Little 3, you're gonna go with that? I want to vote
You go then.
because, the question is, should we delete or not delete? Property is demonstrated to have sufficient capacity to support a fully compliant replacement wastewater system as documented in a report by a Vermont licensed designer or Vermont registered professional engineer who also is qualified to evaluate soil suitability for on-site wastewater disposal, attesting that the subject property is able to support construction and operation of a fully compliant replacement system.
My only argument in there is that with little 3 here, you've essentially made this whole pathway A unviable. There won't be a system that is pre-2007 that will support a replacement system that, and you're asking anybody who is pre-2007 to foot the bill to have an engineer come out and engineer a replacement system that they likely would never use. So if you're going to keep 3, delete A. 3 makes this whole pathway A an illusion. And yes,
No.
is it possible? Absolutely, it's
Yeah.
possible.
Hypothetically.
1 in a million.
So are unicorns.
There are some in the surface area that have additional land and are able to qualify for having a replacement area. So
They
wouldn't
would
say
have
it's
to,
complete.
at time of construction, they would have to have an engineered document that states that. So if they don't have that already, which would most likely be the case because they'd be pre-2007 looking for clean slate exemptions, they would have to come up with the 3,000 to 5,000 to have an engineer come out and say, no, I don't have to hook up. I mean, it's giving the illusion of choice, but it really is no choice at all, which I understand. We want users on the system to make it affordable, but I still think that people should be able to make their own choice if they want to.
I mean, the classic one would be Frank Davis and his wife over here.
Yeah, I don't know anybody.
No, I'm just saying, they had a brand new system put in before 2007. They own, I don't know, 1.5 acres. out of that, you could put in another system.
Is he outside the floodplain and the river?
Yes.
But I thought we also learned that, systems only lasted about 20 years.
That's an average lifespan, yeah.
Right.
It's not written. That's
Yeah.
not written in stone anywhere.
Yeah,
It's
I
like
would
saying
say-
water flows.
I would say it's probably more than that. 20 to 30 is usually what I tell people, but certainly many last longer than that also. One other consideration I was just going to throw out there was we're not actually, the way the ordinance is written isn't actually requiring that you get the permit for the replacement or design it. It's essentially asking the designer or engineer to say that they believe is a fully complying replacement is possible on the lot. So really, you would need to look at the property, understand where the wells are, understand where the setbacks are, and probably dig a test pit or two to understand what the soils are. So I hear you though. That's a cost that's not insignificant.
And it's a great incentive to get people to hook up. I understand the purpose of it, but
Yeah, that's the tricky balance for sure. Yep.
to be clear, 1/5 of an opinion,
No, we're gonna take a vote right now.
and I'm not passionate enough about it
Oh.
to call it to a vote unless you are.
Oh,
I'm fine leaving it in if the rest of the board, there's no reason to have a vote and have my hand be the only one out of all. I've made my stink, it's in the records.
No, I would stay with what it is right now, because there is several people that have that capability on the northern side of Route 15.
So you would like to, you know what, Linda, let's call it to a vote. That's the democratic.
I think you're misunderstanding. I would even make it easy by taking it out.
If free comes out, they don't have to, all they have to show is that, and when we can already do it on a map. All they have to do is show that their building and their septic is outside that 500-year floodplain corridor. And that it's never been a failed system. If we keep 3, if they want to stay on their own systems when the construction happens, they got to go get an engineer or a soil or, a licensed designer, get a letter and give it to the town. It's an extra step of evaluation. One other possible upside of keeping 3, it might help folks make a better decision. They got to spend $500 and go get somebody to come out there. They say, well, I know you don't really want to connect, but let me show you something. It could help people make a better decision by keeping 3, but you're right that it adds a hoop that may or may not go their way.
I make a motion that, number 3 remains, in the ordinance. Yes. We have a second? We don't have a second, so it fails.
So it comes out.
Yes.
Okay, done. It comes out.
Yes.
And to be clear, that means that the property would both have to be outside of the corridor and outside of the flood zone. And be a non-failed pre-2000
Yes.
system.
Can't have failed, cannot have been a failed system.
I feel like that's strict enough.
You have failed systems that then get fixed.
Somebody could have had, if it was,
I mean, a currently failed system?
if it was a failed, you might want to ask people to attest that it hasn't been failed. What we'd want is to see that DEC doesn't have an enforcement action against the property. Which I went through with a property in another town that starts with W. Where there was an active enforcement issue. So
that's how you would know.
I think that's how you could ask people to attest that it's never been failed.
I like the attesting because there are probably a lot of scenarios that do have the seasonal failures, you know, and people can limp by for years. And if that's the case, they really should be hooking up. So some sort of an attestment that they have not had any problems, I think would be worth it personally, but.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Could we have a form or something that if they want to, they. At the time when they say they don't want to, that they attest it as. Like you were saying the other day, have a form that as the property owner, you attest it is fine.
Yeah, they have to prove compliance with current state water, or state wastewater, or at this point, local wastewater ordinances.
Mhm.
So that would make little two, the owner of the property completes a statement on a form prescribed by the town that attesting that the system has not at any time constituted a failed system as defined herein. And what we mean, we don't write the attestation in the ordinance. You get a piece of paper and they sign it, and then you say, okay, fine.
Yeah, and that will be the leverage that we would need in order to make them hook up when we find that they aren't actually in compliance. System does have some failure.
Sorry, clarification. 7.3, all of A is going to be
Well, just little three.
just little 3.
And a little two will be modified to require attestation by the property owner.
Little 2 under little B have the same language then?
Yeah.
Same.
Certainly should. Also. And then the other thing that is still 20% reserve capacity is great, and then our only other blank is going to be section 12, starting on page 23, number 3, determination of use charge. 3, how we set up that charge per gallon of capacity. So this would be page 24.
You doing?
Huh?
I think Linda will have that figured out, but you meet the 5th and then.
So you either sign off or you keep watching and I have bowl cereal. You figure out your own dinner.
The 5th and the 19th.
Well, given that, I mean, those are literally our own, that is the only pending item after tonight's. Is the final math of the non-residential charge. I can get that tidied up in a couple of days. Then the question is what attorney can review it on behalf of the town and how quickly. So the league has said they're not doing anything till after town meeting.
Mid-March.
So until that is filled in, we wouldn't be adopting these, is that what I'm hearing?
So I think you could send this as it is right now to an attorney. We could send it tonight if somebody has. Yeah. Because that's the only thing left is to clean that up. Otherwise, it's good. What was it? Just, Did you tell me that there are more Vermont Bar Association members over 80 than under 30?
Yes.
A little concerning. It's
There are more Vermont Bar Association members over the age of 80
Oh.
than under the age of 30.
They talk about a trade gap, they don't ever mention lawyers.
Expense in spending 2 years under somebody.
Yeah.
Is Paul Gillies not doing this anymore? Is he retired?
I think Paul even retired because we were trying to get him to work on something I'm working on in Middlesex, and he's like, absolutely not. I'm having Steve Sitzel's out. Yeah. There are a couple more phone calls stuff that I can do.
So should we have it on the agenda for the 5th or not, or just wait for it gets closer and see? Is that what we should do? So,
I mean, I can tidy up. If we can talk in the next couple of days, I can tidy up the sewer use chart map and have it ready to go. I don't think it's a terrible idea to have it on the 5th. Again, had we not spent an ungodly amount of time working with Dave Rue on Westford, going through things like the indemnification, the allowances to inspect and stuff, I'd be much more nervous, but we worked through a lot of the nuts and bolts. The failed system definition catch is a good one. We'll make sure that's completely aligned with the state, even with its grammatical errors, and see what we can do. It's also about your comfort of warning something for select board vote that has not been attorney reviewed yet, that is consequential, so.
I personally don't like the idea of an amendment because adopting an ordinance is somewhat lengthy.
And expensive, and you
Yeah.
gotta notice it and everything else, so I think it would be ideal.
Might as well do it the first time right, in
Yeah.
my mind. Unless we under a time frame? Then,
I mean, you want it in effect when you start going to people with the easements to sign to construct the system.
all right,
You definitely want it there. Beyond that, no. I spent a year and a half doing a retroactive ordinance, where for a very complicated system, where it was kind of, oh, you mean we were supposed to really put that on the books before we built all this stuff? Yes, you were. So it's, yeah. But before you go out with easements to folks, it'd be ideal to have this on the books, Board of Sewer Commissioners constituted, ready to run them.
I'll just chime in that I mean, especially if we need to have this for going out to get easements. I mean, this all needs to be happening really quickly right now. So,
well, that's why I'm asking. All right.
I think finding an attorney who can be doing the easements is probably the most critical path. So,
Yes, I agree.
So do you need an attorney to review this as well? Do we have one in place, or is it
No,
just
that's
the
the
attorney?
problem, we don't know. Everyone's too busy, we're not interested. We're working on it.
But this has nothing to do with these, it's where you're trying to, I'm just referring to the word.
Any other questions or comments?
You decided for placing this on the February 5th agenda?
I think we'll just notice that it's there. I'm not sure whether we'll take action. It's another transparency of letting people know it's out there. If not, I'll take a,
During the meeting, I will make that motion. I will second that. I'm from Harry Sox Farm.
thank you very much, everyone, for coming
Yes.
out for this special meeting.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.